Okay, so think about this. Think back to being a teenager, right? All those crazy emotions, trying to figure out who you are, and now add in social media. It's like a whole other layer of complexity on top of everything else.
Yeah, it's completely changed the game for how young people experience pretty much everything, how they connect with each other, how they express themselves. It's even affected how they see the world. And you know what? Over 95% of teens are on social media these days.
Wow, 95%, that's a huge number. So in this deep dive, we're going to really explore what that actually means for them, like the good, the bad, all of it.
Right. And we're going to be using some really interesting research to help us make sense of it all. We've got this academic paper called Impact of Social Media on Youth, a comprehensive analysis. It's pretty in depth.
Perfect for a deep dive.
Exactly. And we've also got this fact sheet that's just focused on teenagers and social media use specifically.
So like the big picture and then the nitty-gritty details. Sounds like a good combo.
Yeah. And I think, a good place to start is with something that's often seen as a good thing, right? Connection. Social media can make it so easy to find people who get you, who are into the same things you are, especially if you're feeling kind of isolated or like you don't fit in.
Yeah, it's like finding your tribe.
Exactly, your people. And it's not just about finding those people, it's about staying connected. And that's something that I think was really, really important during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, those lockdowns were tough.
They were. The research actually shows that for a lot of teens, social media was like a lifeline during those times when everyone was apart.
Makes sense. But, there's this flip side to being constantly connected, right? You can start to feel like you're missing out if you're not plugged in all the time.
Oh,
A
absolutely.
whole FOMO thing.
The fear of missing out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a lot of pressure to be on all the time. And honestly, I feel that myself sometimes, even as an adult. Like,
Yeah.
have you ever felt that? Like that pull to be constantly checking in because of social media?
Oh my gosh, yeah, all the time. And it's not even just about feeling like you have to be present. It's also about the lack of downtime. Those quiet moments when you can just be by yourself and kind of process things. And the research actually talks about this idea of digital stress, which a lot of teenagers are dealing with right now.
So even with something like connection, which we usually think of as a good thing, there's this like double-edged sword thing going on. It gives you something, but it kind of takes something away too.
Exactly. And that's something we see playing out in all these different areas of a young person's life. Like even how they figure out who they are, their identity. Social media can be this amazing platform for them to try things out.
Yeah, for sure.
Like different personas connecting with communities that are different from their everyday life. It's like a space to figure out what they're about and what they care about.
I remember feeling like I could be more myself online in a way I couldn't always be in person.
Yeah, and you know what? The research actually supports that. There's this one study that found that young people who used social media to like really express their opinions, to get involved in conversations and debates, their well-being actually increased.
Hmm. So it's not just about scrolling and liking things.
No, it's about being active, using your voice,
Yeah.
participating. It's like social media becomes this testing ground for who you are.
That's interesting. So social media as like a virtual identity lab.
Yeah, I like that. But even with a lab, there can be downsides, right? Like things can go wrong.
I would guess so, yeah.
I mean, think about it. The same space that lets you explore who you are can also become this breeding ground for comparison. You can't get away from those perfectly curated profiles, right?
Highlight reel.
Yeah, and the pressure to measure up to, let's be honest, unrealistic beauty standards. And in the research we're looking at, especially that fact sheet about teenagers, they found a really clear link between that kind of social comparison and things like body image issues.
It can even lead to things like disordered eating.
Exactly, and that's scary stuff.
It is. And we hear a lot about thinspiration content these days. I'm not sure everyone really understands what that is or how damaging it can be.
Right. Thinspiration, it's basically any type of media, pictures, videos, whatever, that promotes extreme thinness as like the ideal.
Like being super skinny is the goal.
Yeah, and it often comes with all this unhealthy weight loss advice and images that basically glorify eating disorders. And it's so harmful because it makes these dangerous behaviors seem normal, and it makes it way easier for young people who are already feeling vulnerable to fall into those patterns.
It's like this distorted version of reality that can actually have really serious consequences for someone's health, both their physical and mental health.
Yeah, and the fact sheet actually mentions studies that have linked edited selfies, the ones where people make themselves look thinner or whatever, to low self-esteem, especially for teenage girls.
So just a constant reminder that, yeah, the online world can be great for connecting with people, but it's got this shadow side too.
It definitely does. We can't ignore that.
And that brings us to, I think, one of the biggest things we need to talk about: how social media affects mental health. It's complicated and there's a lot of debate, but both of the sources we're looking at, they both point to this link between using social media a lot and higher rates of depression and anxiety in teenagers.
Yeah, and one thing that's really important to understand is that it's not always a simple cause and effect thing.
Like social media doesn't necessarily cause depression,
Right, it might not be the root cause, but it can make things worse.
like an amplifier.
Exactly. It creates this environment where negative thoughts and comparisons can just take over.
And one of the statistics that really stood out to me from the academic paper was that teens who are already dealing with moderate to severe depression, they're almost twice as likely to be on social media almost all the time.
That's a pretty powerful finding.
It is, and it's a little scary too, honestly.
Yeah, and I think it highlights just how important it is for us to really understand how social media and mental well-being are connected, especially for young people who might already be struggling.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. Like, if you're a parent, a teacher, or really anyone who cares about kids, this is important stuff to be aware of. And it makes me think about all the ways social media is affecting young people, not just individually, but as a whole, as a society.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we've been talking about the personal stuff, but there's this whole other level of impact. And honestly, some of it's pretty dark, like cyberbullying and trolling. Both of the sources talk about how serious those things can be for young people.
It's easy to brush it off, like, oh, it's just online, it's not real life.
Right, like words can't hurt you.
But that's just not true. I mean, the impact of social media paper, they talk about this study where they found that kids who get cyberbullied, they're actually more likely to have problems with drugs and alcohol, be more aggressive, even get in trouble with the law.
Yeah, what happens online definitely doesn't stay online. It can have real-world consequences.
And then, it's not even just bullying. Our sources also go into some really disturbing stuff, like online child sex abuse and exploitation. That's happening to way too many kids.
Yeah, that's the really, really heavy stuff.
The academic paper had this statistic that really got to me. Over 50% of the victims of this kind of online sexual exploitation are between 12 and 15 years old.
That's a lot of kids.
It's a huge number.
Yeah.
And it just shows you how real the dangers are online.
It's definitely a hard conversation to have, but we have to talk about it.
Absolutely. If we want to protect kids, we have to be aware of what's going on.
Awareness is key. And, both of our sources, they don't just talk about the problems. They actually give some advice on how to deal with all this, how to stay safe online.
It's good to have some solutions, not just problems.
Right, exactly. And a lot of it is about giving young people the tools to protect themselves. Like in that teenagers and social media use fact sheet, they have this whole section called What You Can Do. It's full of tips for teens.
What kind of stuff do they suggest? I'm curious.
Well, one of the things they say is to curate your feed.
Curate?
Yeah, be mindful of who you're following and what kind of stuff you're seeing. If something makes you feel bad, unfollow that account.
Yeah.
It's your feed. You have the power to choose what you see.
Makes sense. It's easy to just scroll and see whatever pops up.
Right. But if you're more intentional about it, it can actually make a big difference in how you feel.
I like that. Be intentional. And what else do they say?
They also talk about setting boundaries with your friends about social media.
Boundaries? Like how?
Like making agreements, like, hey, no phones at dinner, or maybe having times when everyone puts their phones away.
Yeah, to take a break.
Exactly. It's so easy to be connected 24/7 these days. It's good to reclaim some time to just hang out,
In real life.
in real life, face to face. And of course, they also say it's super important to talk to adults you trust about what's going on.
To have those tough conversations.
Right. A parent, a teacher, a counselor, whoever you feel comfortable with, just being able to talk about what you're going through online, it can really help.
Yeah, because a lot of times kids are dealing with this stuff on their own.
Alone. And just having someone to talk to, it can make all the difference. But, it's not all on young people to fix this, right? It's not just about what they do.
Like it's bigger than that.
Way bigger. We need to be working on this as a society. The fact sheet talks about joining movements that are pushing for better social media design.
So trying to change the platforms themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Young people using their voices to make social media safer and more supportive.
I love that.
Yeah.
That they're not just accepting things as they are, they're trying to make things better.
And we need to support them in that. Like us, the adults, the parents, the teachers, everyone. We have to stay informed, stay involved, and push for policies that encourage responsible social media use.
It's a shared responsibility.
Exactly. And it goes back to what we were saying before. Young people are not just passively consuming this stuff, they're active participants.
Yeah.
And they need to have a say in shaping the digital world. But they need our help to do that.
Yeah, I think we get so caught up sometimes in thinking of social media as this big bad thing. But it's not that simple.
No, definitely not. It's not going away anytime soon. And like we were saying, it's not good or bad in itself. It's a tool.
Right, like a hammer. You can build something with it, or you can use it to, break stuff.
Exactly. It all comes down to how we use it and what we do with it.
And being aware of how it affects us.
Yes, being mindful, being intentional, and thinking critically about how we're interacting with these platforms.
And how it's affecting the kids growing up with all this.
Absolutely. And, that actually brings us to what I think is the most important takeaway from all this research. Like, the big question for everyone listening, for all of us. How do we use the good parts of social media, the power of it, while also protecting ourselves from the bad stuff? How do we make sure it's not hurting us or the young people in our lives?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
It is, and there's no easy answer. But we can't just ignore it. We can't pretend it's not happening or just say social media is ruining everything and give up.
Right. It's somewhere in between.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, embracing the good stuff, like the connections, the creativity, all that, but also being real about the risks and doing what we can to protect ourselves and the kids.
So a lot of what we've talked about today is about education and just being aware of the research and talking to young people, helping them be smart about how they use social media.
Right, and helping them become good digital citizens.
So it's not just on the kids, it's on all of us.
Exactly. And this isn't a one-time thing. Things are changing all the time with technology, with social media. We have to stay engaged, keep learning, and keep working towards a better online world for everybody.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive.
I agree.
And I think we've covered a lot of ground, but this is really just the start of the conversation. I hope everyone listening will walk away from this with a better sense of how complicated this all is, how social media and young people are connected. And hopefully we've given everyone some things to think about, some ways to move forward.
Yeah, that's what we were hoping for.
So to everyone listening, thanks for being here with us for this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep this conversation going.